Hello, this is Sarah McKinney, and I am presenting my final project for Survey of Musical Theater, Harold Prince, Directorial Vision in the Modern Musical. So, to understand better about Harold Prince or Hal Prince, we have to know a little bit about his early life. Um, Prince attributes much of who he was and how he approached life and people to a mental breakdown he had at 14. It lasted nearly 6 months. Um, he brought himself out of it. He said about 3 months in that he started actually being able to like sleep at night instead of being up all night and that sort of thing. Um, and as he came out of it, he built himself into, quote, quite a friendly, extroverted hyper person, a sponge as far as information was concerned. And because he did that and he built himself into this kind of person, he actually built up and developed a whole lot into the ability to have a lot of strong bonds with other people because he was willing to be vulnerable with himself and who he was and his past and how he got to where he was. It made other people far more comfortable to also share their experiences with him. Um, as far as other parts of early years, he was born January 30th of 1928, and he started working with his mentor, George Abbott, in 1948 at just 20 years old. And this early start allowed him to have a theatrical career, including his time with Abbott of about 67 years, 61 to 62 of which were done after his work with Abbott. Um, he also, speaking about his early life, there was never a question that I would go to college and that I would travel, that I would go to the theater early and often. Mine was a family addicted to theater, and still there was no effort to encourage me to work in it of to discourage me, and at no time was there any push, uh, nor any to push me into finance. So I didn't have to resist something I would have resisted. So his family, because of their love of theater and performance, uh, never pushed him to do anything other. And he knew from a very young age, I believe he said about 8 years old, that theater is what he wanted to go into. Um, his mentors. I've already mentioned George Abbott, who was absolutely probably his biggest mentor. Abbott gave Prince his start. Um, Essentially, Prince sent a script in an interview he did with PBS and in multiple places he talked about what basically got him the job with Abbott was that he was so persuasive in his letter of like, just let me work. I will work for free. And if anyone can tell that I am working for free, fire me. Like they should not be able to tell the difference that you're not paying me. Um, and Abbott took him on. It worked. Abbott wasn't really concerned about his legacy or what he was leaving or how he was being remembered, which is a difference that between him and how Prince. Also, just with quite a few people that Prince worked with, that's not a concern that a focus for them. I guess would be a better way of saying it. That was not a focus for them, but how Prince was always a bit worried about or focused on the lasting effect and the changes and the difference he was making. Um, Abbott was in charge. He believed the director should be in charge. He commanded respect naturally. And the artists that were working with him really wanted his approval. Um, he was called Mr. Abbott. And in one of the books I was reading, uh, when he later on asked how Prince, why do you still call me Mr. Abbott? And he's like, why does everyone call me Mr. Abbott? And Prince was like, because you are. And it took him a very long time to be able to drop the Mr. Even though Abbott would have been very happy for that to happen. Um, while Prince developed his own style that was not the same as George Abbott, he did model some of his style after Abbott. In fact, he's quoted to say, "I learned discipline from Abbott, the lesson that there is no time in not time in theater for nonsense or self-indulgence. His absolute professionalism taught me that the theater is a place to work, to get the job done, and to respect one's colleagues." So it was about staying focused, getting the work done, and being respectful, really, of other people's time. The other person I put as a mentor for him was Jerome Robbins, who he later called Jerry, and they had worked. He both learned from Robbins, but he also ended up working on several shows with Robbins as his choreographer. Um, he was able to observe Robbins, um, both on the work of West Side Story and Fiddler on the Roof, and learned from Robbins' approach, which was very different, but still very structured and style. He knew exactly what he wanted of the people he was working with and who he was choreographing and directing. But unlike Abbott, he was more off the cuff, letting the art and the performer speak for the work and help guide the work to an extent. Um, it was said that where Abbott is clear and decisive, Robbins was ambivalent. Where Abbott is secure, Robbins is sometimes painfully uncertain. Robbins did also apprentice and study under Abbott for a short time. Sometimes people called him a method director, but he was like, "That's not what I am." When asked in an interview with PBS about the what he learned from Jerry Robbins, he said, Hal Prince said, "Me or everybody? Oh, I think the marriage of dance movement and storytelling. And I personally learned that spatial relationship he used with his dancers. I used it all over again when I did Sweeney Todd. They're not dancing, they're moving in a pack. They're moving in a pack that might have danced if we'd chosen to." So he learned that choral movement, that massive group movement, that can be very artistic, that we recognize today. We see it, and it's just a beautiful flow of the story, the unending flow to the story. So finding his own style. We talked about his two biggest influences. Now, how did he find his own style? It was a blending of these styles, really. He found a balance. It was well planned, well researched. He really dove into like full dramaturgist understanding of his scripts and what he wanted out of them, what these characters, who the characters were, what they needed to help guide his actors uh, to those spots so that he could really make the show everything he wanted. He was also really good at knowing what his weaknesses were and finding people to fill in those gaps and those blanks. Uh, he was very open. He was very real. He gave when people talked about how what his directing style was, they're like he gave critiques as if he was problem solving in the moment. He's like, "Okay, stop there, go." And Hirsch, watching audition or not auditions, rehearsals for Cabaret, was able to break this down. I really highly recommend the books in my works cited that were outside of the classes reading, um, if you're interested in Hal Prince, because well, one, it was written by him as his second book that he wrote, and the other one was written about him in between the two books he wrote, and they are just eye-opening and really detailed and beautifully done. Um, so once it comes down to like tech week, essentially, Hal Prince has a whistle. He blows it loudly. He blows it for anything. The lights are wrong, whistle, stop. Everything stops. He fixes it. The curtain's wrong, whistle, stops, fixing it. Set, costume. He doesn't like the hat. Anything. An actor makes a choice. Like it, whatever it is, he would blow the whistle. He was very harsh in those times, and he would apologize for it later, but because he worked with everyone so well, and this was a crunch time, like harsh, make it like perfectionist last minute tweaks, his the people he worked with also craved his approval and his praise and doing it right, just like he did and others did from Abbott. um, but he also saw it Abbott's approval throughout Abbott's lifetime, and he did often receive it. There were, I believe it was West Side Story that Abbott came to, and he said, "I wouldn't change a thing." So it's always something that when we get our mentors to be like, "It's good," it always helps. Um, of how Prince, um, Steve Harley, who was cast as the original Phantom before Michael Crawford, said in an interview for when the movie was done in 2004 that when they realized that he was not going to be able to do the justice that Phantom needed, and that they needed to part ways, that the only what really bothered me was that I would never see Hal Prince again. To be honest, 6 months of off and on seeing Hal and being taught how to develop and work, and working with such a man was going to be obviously an experience of a great experience, an experience of a lifetime. I was instantly aware that it was bye bye Hal. And I remember seeing that was actually that moment in that interview was a turning point for me with Hal Prince. I didn't know who he was before those interviews. I didn't know anything about him, but I just remember watching the making of Phantom of the Opera, the behind the masks features on this for the for the original production, and just knowing that I wanted to either be a director like him or be trained by a director like him, or all of the above. To have someone who was not from the industry come in, work hard, and just have wanted to do so much for this person and have such respect. And then it would then go to the Hal part of the interviews, and he was just so humble and pragmatic and down to earth and humble, and it just was everything. And the more I've read, the more it just proved that. Um, In Hirsch's book, he recognized that the kind of bond Prince establishes with his actors is apparent in a post opening party he hosts in his suite. The evening shifts from manic post performance excitement to a mood of true confessions. And anyone who's done theater, we know exactly what this shift looks like. We know exactly the kind of bond it takes to truly have that. Um, and Also for just his blending in his own style and finding it, it wasn't the traditional musical. To the audience for whom the Broadway musical need not be an inevitable prescription for good-natured fluff, Prince is a true pioneer, the auteur of the modernist concept musical who has expanded a genre's thematic and theatrical possibilities. He was a, just a, here for it, and a, he was here for it. Right. Collaborators, people he worked with. The main person he worked with was Stephen Sondheim. He worked with a lot of people actually really well. He did multiple pairings. Um, I can't remember reading a single person that it did not work well with him to work with them. That they just didn't like each other or anything like that. Um, they Sondheim and Prince met for the first time at the opening of South Pacific in 1948, although Prince did say that he remembers it better than Sondheim. Sondheim doesn't really remember it. But that meeting led to them working on 6 shows, 5 which were very successful over a 12-year span together. But they would also consult and work and discuss with each other outside of those shows that they were actually working together. They were getting started about the same time. Prince was 20, I believe, when Sondheim was 18. And when he was starting with George Abbott, Sondheim was starting his work as the mentee of Oscar Hammerstein II. Their first collaboration was Company, and their final one, I was a little confused, and I'm like, my brain's not remembering it right, was either A Little Night Music or Merrily We Roll Along. I do have that correctly in his resume section coming up. Um, but of their collaborations, it was said that the openness to each other and to third parties, combined with the search for what had not been seen or considered before, describes the essence of their relationship and its results. And perhaps the greatest and most ironic indication of their bond is sometimes reaction to the final fruitless efforts to pull merrily together. That month of fervent hysterical activity was the most fun I've ever had in a show. And that was in an article by Beale about the relationship of Sondheim and Prince and their work relationship together. Jerome Robbins also worked with Prince, not just as a mentor situation, and he helped Prince understand how movement and dance staging works. Um, in an interview, Prince said that dance made it possible for guys like me who can't choreograph to see movement coming towards the audience, coming diagonally from upstage all the way down, or diagonally from downstage all the up. That kind of movement, which was intrinsically dance movement, is now used in directing every musical. So not only did Hal Prince understand what Robbins was doing, and he applied it to Sweeney Todd. This is also around the time where he's talking about Sweeney Todd in the interview. Uh, and he recognized that this movement, this flow, was going to be highly effective. We see it in Fiddler. In the interview, he talks about a couple other shows where it just, you see the in one act space, the in one scenes essentially, and how you could flow from behind the main curtain down in front of it, having this scene that's a transition, and then by the time you got back, the set was changed. Curtain opens, the traveler opens, and starting to use that traveler. uh, he saw a lot of innovations, both in technical and directorial technology in general, and how some of the old techniques continued on or were brought back or forgotten temporarily. Um, and he used them all to his advantage as best as he could. So Broadway and beyond, the man was a talent. He was on Broadway, he was off Broadway, he was in Europe, he traveled, he learned, he did a lot of amazing things. Um, a lot of these quotes talk about where he got inspiration and how he inspired others. Um, the work of Harold Prince played a pivotal role in transforming musical theater of the last third of the 20th century into director's theater. He was like the only, just about the only successful director during this time that was not a choreographer director. He was just a director, and he went and found choreographers to fill in those gaps where he had weaknesses. Um, Thus far, Hal Prince has directed some 20 original musicals on Broadway, most of which he also produced. He had his hand in multiple pots in handling this. Of Love, Life, and Allegro, it was said that perhaps he, Prince, learned from these shows when he eventually came to the realization that they didn't work. For Prince would spend much of his career in the theater seeking ways not only of making shows that were driven by concepts, but also making them work. He saw what was failed in Love Life and in Allegro, and he found ways to make it work. After parting from Sondheim, Prince continued to work through Broadway channels, but he failed on Broadway again with two conceptually based pieces. So he just traveled outside of the United States and most notably found success with Phantom of the Opera in 1986. Um, when he was asked about what it meant that for the like shows that we as Americans loved over the years, like what did it say about us? He said, "Well, they say we're naive. They also say we're optimistic, and they say we're a bit sentimental." And I just after going through this course, I think that sums up this whole course so beautifully. That the way that we in modern day look at musicals, and honestly, every stage of the process we've learned about Americans are naive. We're optimistic. We think we can fix it and find the new thing or make it work. And we're absolutely sentimental. We absolutely look back at things we've done in the past. Um, of Cabaret, it was noted that it was only after we'd come by, for he wasn't in, was only interested in telling the story when he was able to parallel it to real problems in our country. In fact, there's a picture he showed the first day of the first rehearsal, the first time in the 60s, of people in protest. People were like, "Oh, it's Berlin." It wasn't. It was Little Rock with Brown versus Board of Education and desegregation of schools. He was also the first one invited to the White House to create an entertainment show. Uh, First one to play in the East Room of the White House. And at the time, he made a collaboration of things from The Pajama Game, New Girl in Town, The Music Man, and West Side Story. His resume, it is long, it is detailed, it goes through so much, and even it cut off on this video of the 2017, or no, 2015 he was directing it, but it was everything was out by then. Um, just the amount of work he did and overlapping. There were so many times he was doing multiple projects at one time. Just an impressive resume. Um, yeah, the legacy of the Prince of Broadway. His final project was called The Prince of Broadway in 2017. It went up just 2 years before his death in 2019. He In his book, Sense of Occasion, he said, by the time this book reaches the public in mid September of 2017, I will have opened Prince of Broadway. It was Stephen Sondheim's title for him at the Samuel J. Friedman Theater for the Manhattan Theater Club on Broadway. They're billing it as a celebration. I think of it as a biography of a 62-year career. Now, the idea that Hal Prince is the Prince of Broadway goes back decades. In Hirsch's book, he noticed a pillow that was embroidered, "Who is the Prince of Broadway?" that was in his office. So even in the 80s, or by the 80s, they had already been calling him the Prince of Broadway. Obviously, a bit of a pun and play on his last name, but also he just had so many copious pieces of work that were successful and not successful that he was the Prince of Broadway. uh, he saw connections and built stories, and um, I think that the next quote captured a lot of how he approached things and why he was so successful. And he said that are you doing that as a musical was a question that he's heard all his life. And if he'd listened to it, it would have stopped him from working on a lot of shows. For example, he probably never would have done uh, Kiss of the Spider Woman and turned it from a novel into a musical in the 80s. His ability to see the story and see the characters and understand what could possibly potentially be successful as a musical instead of just dismissing it definitely was a large part in his successes. And I think that also the fact that how he recognized that his mental breakdown at 14 was a big part of how he was able to connect to people. And I believe that it helped him not only see people, but the stories, and that blending is what made him so impactful and why he can be called the Prince of Broadway, why he made the impact he did, why he made the connections he did, why he was able to see these shows as important when other people dismissed them. It was because he saw pieces of himself and the people he knew and the hardships they'd gone through in each of them. I have my works cited here. I stuck mainly to 6 sources. I looked at a whole lot more, and I'm sure some of what I talked about came from others, but these were my main ones. Again, if you have not read Sense of Occasion by Harold Prince or uh, Foster Hirsch's Harold Prince and the American Musical Theater, I highly recommend them. I also am looking at getting Hal Prince's first book so that I can compare them more in depth. But one of the beautiful things he did with Sense of Occasion is he took his first book, included those chapters, and then just commented on what he's learned since then. Just absolutely 10 out of 10, worth the read. It has been almost 25 minutes. I have my work cited, as I said, and then I just thank you for sticking with me this long. Dr. A, thank you for presenting this course with such wonderful materials to help us understand. I was looking forward to it from the time we were in our acting class this summer and we were talking about six, and I just wanted to have a better understanding of what you meant in my and expand my definition and understanding of musical theater so that when I am teaching my students in future, I can give them as an introductory, still a basic understanding of musical theater, but also a better understanding of musical theater than what I got when I first started out. So, thank you for presenting this class so well and building our ability to have wonderful discussions with each other. And I hope you enjoyed my final project.